Hey students, how are you all today? I'm going to talk to you about some research findings and stories about learning, and then I'm going to have you post about classrooms and learning at the end of this podcast. So the first three things I want to talk to you about. Number one is Howard Gardner's research on multiple intelligences. You know the idea that some people are visual learners, and so that they need things that flop and floop around and they learn best by reading and looking at pictures. And some people are auditory learners and they learn best by music and having visuals or things, auditory things. And that some people are more intrapersonal learners, they learn best by conversations. Some people are more intrapersonal learners, they learn best by being alone and thinking about the material. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. That's Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. There's a problem with that theory. It makes intuitive sense, right? But what the research suggests is that although people are different types of learners, it doesn't really matter when it comes down to like a spelling test or any kind of test, a math test or whatever. The visual learners don't do better if we have this stuff presented, the material presented in a visual way. The auditory learners don't do better on the test if we present it in an auditory way. Okay, that's weird, right? Wouldn't you expect that if I'm a visual learner, I would do best on a visual task presented to me visually for a test? The reason why Gardner's theories haven't borne out, okay, this is important, is that the bottom line is that all of us use a lot of our senses when we're learning. And the more a good teacher reaches multiple senses, the better off our learning experience is going to be, the more we're going to remember. So it's not that I have to teach to a visual learner in a visual way, or an auditory learner in an auditory way, or whatever else. Is that the more I can teach visually and auditorily and every other kind of have small group works, have board work, have students come up, draw things, everything else, the more students are going to remember. So it's not like a one-on-one correlation, like I have to teach to my visual learners in a visual way. It's broader than that. It's that I need to get everybody active learning, multiple senses, multiple ways of engagement. Okay, that's number one thing to remember is about multiple learning and Gardner's theories of multiple intelligences and why they haven't really borne out that well in research. The second thing I want you to remember, I want you to think about, is this whole idea of multitasking. Dun, dun, dun. And I know what you're thinking. Most people think this. Most people think that they are very good at multitasking, but that no one else in the world is very good at it. What we really know is that most people aren't good at multitasking when the tasks that we're doing involve higher order brain functioning, okay? So if you're remembering to the details of your vacation and typing those out and narrating them, at the same time you're writing a poem, at the same time you're doing your trigonometry homework, at the same time you're reading your textbook for this class, you're not going to do very well. You might be okay if you're engaging in one higher level task, okay, like reading your textbook, and a lower level task, like listening to music. Okay, you might be okay to get away with that, but if it's much harder to do if you're doing two higher order cognitive tasks. Listening to music doesn't take much mental energy, that's why we can get away with it. Texting and driving, what do we know about that? Bad combination, right? It's bad combination because it's two higher order tasks. It is driving, which you don't think of as higher order, but it is, and texting, which you don't think of as higher order, but it is. You're thinking about the message and the letters you're typing and everything else. So we know from the book that a lot of teens do admit to texting and driving. A lot of you probably text and drive. It's not a good combination. In fact, the research shows that multitasking makes us more mistakes, less productivity, decreases the overall amount of things that we learn and the overall amount of things we can accomplish. It makes you think that you're being more productive, but you're not. Sorry. That's just the way it goes. Number three thing that I want you to teach you is a story about integration. Okay, so I was reading this article about how our brains are set up to integrate information. Okay, and I'm reading it I was very interested in this article. And so basically it talked about that our brains are set up to connect information pieces from one to another. Okay. So the article even talked about, I know some of you have had experiences where you say, I remember in the textbook where I read that. It was on the top of the right page. I remember it was like on the top of page 149 or something. And people are like, you're crazy, how'd you remember that? It's because our brains, hi, can I have a few minutes? Just wait, thanks. It's because our brains are set up to integrate information. You're going to meet my son in a minute, but for now, I know, just wait for a minute. Okay, so, sorry about that. So, you can remember things like, I remember that it's on the top of page 149. You also can remember things like, I learned that when I was sitting in the kitchen. I learned that when I was eating ice cream. Why do you remember those things, right? That's so random to remember something like that. But what actually happens is you do remember that you learned it in the kitchen or sitting outside or while eating ice cream or whatever. You weren't trying to think of like, I'm eating ice cream, so I'm going to remember Vygotsky. But it works like that because your brain is automatically connecting Vygotsky and ice cream, or this coffee shop with Piaget, or wherever you learn the information. So let me tell you a quick story about that, and then we're going to get to the point of posting, okay? So the quick story is, I was telling my son, who was 11 years old at the time, about that article about integration. And I said, isn't this cool, how we learn information and we're set up to use it? So another example from that article, hang on a minute. Would you please give me a minute? Okay, don't walk over here. Okay, so yeah. So I'm using their bedroom on purpose to tell you the story, but now we have like, you know, anyway. So, the other thing that was cool in that article is that, say you have a math test tomorrow, okay? And you're trying to figure out if you're better off to study an hour of English, an hour of math, an hour of art, and an hour of psychology, or if you're better off to study 4 hours of math. What do you think the research would say? Which are you better to study? Just in terms of how well you're going to do on your math test. What do you think? Should you study each subject for an hour, or should you study math for 4 hours? My guess is that you think you're best off to study math for 4 hours, and that's probably what most of you do. But what the research suggests is you're better off to study art for an hour, music for an hour, psychology for an hour, math for an hour, or whatever, 4 subjects I said, and that you're going to do better on your math test if you study each of those for 1 hour. Okay, why? Why would that be? Shouldn't I just cram for the math exam? No, because when you're learning math and you're learning art, you're connecting art, math, science, psychology, everything else gets connected all together. And the deeper you want to learn something and remember it, the more better off you are able to tie it to other things. So you're better off not to just study one subject, you're better off to study multiple subjects, okay? So, our brains are set up to integrate. So comes the personal story. I'm telling my 11-year-old son that, who was the guy who just walked in the room after his shower. And I told him, I said, Zach, this is really cool. You know, what do you think about this? And he goes, that's interesting, Mom, whatever, let's go to bed. Good night. I'm ready to go to bed. And I was like, man, I just had this awesome parenting thing that I was sharing with you, and you didn't even care. You know, I didn't really say that, but I was like, oh, he didn't even care. So we go upstairs, and in his room, there's this book, okay, a picture book of one of his brothers, his younger brothers. And I say, oh, wait, what's your brother's picture book doing over here by your bed? Because he's reading like Harry Potter's, Rick Riordan's, big books, right? Big chapter books, you know, cha-cha-cha-cha-cha, chapter. And he says, oh, Mom, I was reading it. And I said, you were reading the picture book? He says, yeah. In the middle of reading a big chapter book, I always like to read a picture book. It helps me understand the chapter book better when I read a picture book. And I'm like, whoa, that's kind of cool. And he says, it's just like that thing you told me about downstairs. It helps me to think better when I think about one book and then go back to the other book. Yeah. So what you learned from this is you learned active learning is important. We need to hit all the senses. That's that multiple learning thing. You know, that's how it plays out really. It's not really that we need to just teach the visual learners in a visual way. It's that active learning is a trump card. And you learn that multitasking doesn't work, even though you might believe it does. And you learn that our brains are set up to integrate. Now, I want you to post on this. Think about your educational experiences, okay? Think about your classrooms right now. Think about classes you've been in the last couple of years at Spalding. You can think about high school, grade school. I don't care what you think about. Have your educational experiences been organized in a way to capitalize on how we learn best? And if so, how? And if not, why not? Okay? Does that make sense? So I want you to think about, do your educational classroom experiences, online experiences, enhance your learning, or do they detract from it? If they do detract from it, what happens? How do they do that? And, part two, how would you set it up differently? If you were in control of creating classrooms, how would they look? How would they be? What would they look like and feel like? I have a vision of a classroom, for example, that has incredibly comfortable chairs that people never want to leave, and like a nice fire that's roaring all the time, and people are drinking coffee and tea, and we're sitting around talking about awesome ideas, and it's, maybe we're having chocolate or something, and it's such an incredible experience, and everybody's having such a great discussion that nobody wants to leave. Okay, that's what I think of when I think of what a classroom should be. And it's not a bunch of hard chairs and plastic and fluorescent lighting or anything else. Why do I think that would be a good idea? I don't really, you don't have to answer that question, but what I really want you to think about is, how should we create classrooms that get people to learn? And how are our classrooms now? Are they created in that way to get people to learn or not? All the things you read in chapter 7 are going to be super duper helpful to you in answering that question. Okie dokie, post your little hearts away and I'll be eager to see what you read. Thanks, bye.